Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, or it could be whiskey with an analyst reading a spreadsheet, linking crime events, identifying a series, and getting the latest scoop on association news and training. So please don't beat that analyst and join us as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has 22 years of law enforcement analysis experience with both North Carolina and South Carolina. He holds a master's in criminology from the University of North Carolina. Here to talk about, among other things, CompStat, community-oriented policing, and problem-oriented policing. Please welcome Damien Williams. Damien, how we doing?
Hey, Jason. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you today. I've been a longtime fan of your podcast, so super excited to speak with you today and have some good conversation about crime analysis.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And it's funny. I still blush a little bit when people realize that they're fans or that they acknowledge that, hey, you've interviewed over 200 analysts. I feel that when I say it, it's perfectly fine. But when someone says it to me, I get a little bit I'm a little embarrassed by that spotlight, which I shouldn't be. I need to get over that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a good thing, though. Absolutely. It's a great podcast.
Let's get started. How did you discover the law enforcement analysis profession?
Yeah, Jason. So basically, I did undergrad at North Carolina State University and I was on the four and a half year plan there. So it took me a little bit longer than my cousin at the time. He was majoring in the same thing, criminology, sociology, those types of things. And he had graduated in May, and he was really interested in joining the North Carolina SBI, which is like the FBI on a state level situation, as you're familiar with. And he was struggling, waiting to get into the academy or whatever they call it there. And so he was working night shift at the North Carolina Capitol doing security there and telling me how much he loved it, of course. And I wasn't really unsure of what direction I wanted to go in law enforcement or criminal justice, and knew I didn't want to be a police officer necessarily. So kind of had the grades to fill out some applications for graduate school. And so I put in some applications for that and ended up going to graduate school at UNC Greensboro. And I kind of started focusing a little bit on career there and learning still sociology, criminology. While I was there, I had the opportunity to do an internship at the Greensboro Police Department and kind of cold called them in a sense, just walked in there one day and met with a lady and I said, hey, looking for some internship opportunities and kind of interested in crime trends, crime patterns, linking things together, told her kind of my interest in watching crime shows. And I said, but I also have this side interest in maps. As a kid, I was always intrigued by family vacations and finding out where we're going and looking at the roads and the street signs. And I said, that kind of continued growing up and geography, a little bit of geography interest in grad school, took a couple of classes. And she says, there's actually we have a crime analyst unit. And I said, I kind of heard of that. And she said, I think it'd be a perfect fit for you. It could be a good internship. Let me talk to the supervisor and see if we can set something up. So about a week later, I got a call back and I met this gentleman who was over the unit at the time. And this was pretty much career changing right here when I met him. It's Dr. Lee Hunt. And in the profession now, he's currently with, I believe, Madison, Wisconsin Police Department. But he really sparked my interest in an internship as far as GIS and crime mapping. And I did some projects during the internship, kind of looking at some of they had a survey, a citizen survey, and we mapped out kind of safety issues around the community by neighborhood and kind of learned the ins and outs of crime mapping. He kind of really guided me a little bit, but also set me aside and said, hey, learn on your own. I'm here for you. But just really pushed my interest in the field. And so that was a great internship and ended up graduating, got my master's degree and started looking at jobs and in the crime analysis field. And in 2000, this was 2000, late 2002, 2003, the profession at that time, still very young. There was some, books about crime analysis out there, but a lot of stuff was forensic. So you really had to weed through kind of that crime analysis profession stuff out there. It was very limited. So I started looking at jobs, and I think the SBI kind of had like an intelligence analyst job, kind of looked at that, and perfect timing because I was from the Raleigh, North Carolina area. I had moved back home with my parents for a little bit looking for jobs, and Raleigh PD had put out for 3 new crime analyst positions at the time, which was ended up being perfect timing for me. So I applied for Raleigh Police Department, and I didn't know this at the time when I applied. They had just gotten a new chief a couple of months prior who was from NYPD, female chief, Chief Perloff at the time. And so obviously during that time, CompStat had, since the mid-90s up until that point, was kind of NYPD focused, and it was kind of starting to spread around the country. And so when she started at Raleigh PD, she was like, hey, I'm going to do CompStat here, and I want more crime analysis. I want more analysts. That's a big part of what we do as Jason.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started there with 3 other analysts who are there currently, and me and 2 other guys, Stacy Joyner and another gentleman who had started right at the same time. And so we're all learning together. One of those first, job, awakenings, keep your head up kind of things was we get there and we have no desk.
Nice.
So we have to basically how police officers, hot car back in the day, we were hot desking. So the current 3 analysts at the time weren't too happy having to share their desk with 3 new guys, but eventually we worked it out and we got our own space, and it was kind of a good setup. We all had kind of our specific crimes. I think I was larcenies, car break-ins and stuff, and we had one analyst for robberies and all of this and such, but very CompStat driven that first job, which was good and bad in some ways. The good side of it was it well respected by command staff. The chief loved us. We were putting out a lot of good information, bulletins, patterns, trends, looking at pretty much every report that was coming through. The flip side was she was not from Raleigh, so there was a little bit of that kind of tension there internally that we didn't really understand at the time, being my first job as an analyst. And kind of we got some pushback as far as a lot of people thought that we were working for her and not working for the department in a sense. And we were trying to find problems to kind of that, I got you. You know what I mean, Jason? Unfortunately. And so we got a little pushback, and especially the CompStat meetings, sometimes it wasn't the 100% traditional NYPD model, but there was a lot of tough conversations in that meeting. And so we started getting a little bit of pushback on what we were putting out, and people thought we were trying to surprise them in a sense.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things you learn when you're at a police department. And I think this is going to be the case regardless of the size of the department. Just the inner turmoil, you want to call it politics, of various leaderships within the department. So whether that's deputy chiefs or colonels or however the department is made up. And I can see in that situation that you were in is you got a new chief from out of state, NYPD. You have other leaders there that have probably been there all their career, multiple years, multiple decades.
Absolutely.
You're not always going to agree on things. So I could understand that you really have to be careful, unfortunately, to really read the room and understand who's not going to like a certain task and who is going to be supportive of a task. And that is something that for a 20-something-year-old can be very difficult, but you'll learn the hard way, one way or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. You kind of learn by doing, and you try to learn the situation, like you said, read the room and developing those relationships. That's kind of a theme that we'll talk about further, especially for my career, is understanding where people are coming from. That 25-year captain or lieutenant who you're the brand new analyst coming in, and trying to give them as much respect as possible, but also providing some new information or maybe some new insights that they didn't see before as a new person as well. So there's value to that as well. But that was a tricky situation. But the good thing about it was we were a group of 6 analysts, and that first job, those friendships, I still talk to a lot of those analysts even today. That bond we had as a group is kind of the difference between kind of being a solo analyst that I've been for a while versus working in a unit. You kind of the good and the bad and the kind of the differences there. I strongly recommend to a lot of analysts out there to kind of get the best of both of those worlds at some point in your career, because you can kind of find value in both situations for sure.
Back to the internship quickly. The professor that you worked with, you get an internship, you really want to get an idea of what the department's like, right? That's understand, get some work experience and help out the department. So I'm curious, with that internship being the academic influence that the professor would have brought to the internship. What did you take out of that internship that helped you once you became an analyst?
I think it was just the ability to kind of take a task and kind of not being micromanaged on it, to kind of say, all right, here's your task, here's look into the whys and the why nots and the what's going on with this problem that we're having. And to kind of just take a project on your own. I think one of the things that you learn quickly as an analyst a lot of times is you can't wait for somebody to kind of tell you what to look into or tell you what to look for. You kind of have to go find it. And not every situation is like that. Sometimes somebody tasked you with something, they want it a certain exact way. But in my situation, it kind of allowed me some creativity there and kind of say, okay, all right, I'm going to look at it from this side, check back in and say, all right, am I going in the right direction, or what do you think about this? Get some, evaluation on that. But kind of that ability to kind of say, hey, I can look into this, analyze it, and kind of come up with my own look into a particular issue. And that's kind of continued my whole career, is to kind of say, a lot of people have always come to me and say, hey, I trust your judgment. You look into it, find out what's going on with this problem, whether it's a crime problem, a social problem, a calls for service problem, whatever the issue is, and bring back some sort of solution or some sort of value to what we're trying to solve in that problem. So that was kind of the main thing I learned, just kind of working on my own as an intern.
No, so it's good. I guess where I was getting at, and it doesn't sound like this, it wasn't too academic what the professor was having you do. It sounds like you really got into very practical stuff, which is good.
You're right. Yeah. And sometimes internships, we do some internships here at Rock Hill, and we try to, with my internships, is I try to give the interns not just, and you've heard this before, not just making copies and get the shredding papers. It sounds so silly, but it does happen sometimes. But actually give them the value in actual projects, whether it's running some basic stats for a neighborhood meeting, or actually saying, hey, the captains kind of want us to delve into this problem. Let's take a look at it, and hey, why don't you look at it from your perspective and see what you come up with. And I think that helps an analyst long term, that they can kind of use those skills further down the line, for sure.
And then back to the sharing of desks. I just realized that sometimes I'm slow. It takes me a minute to keep up. So this is 2003. Yes. 2002, 2003. This isn't laptop era here. Yeah. This is desktop era here. Absolutely. So it's not like when you're talking about rotating through desks or cubicles, or it's not like you're moving desktops. So that means you're also sharing a computer at this point.
Oh, absolutely. And I think, Jason, that lasted, at least to my memory, at least 6 weeks, the first 6, 7, 8 weeks. I mean, it was one of those like, hey, we're building good relationships here, but it's like, all right, let's figure out the situation quicker.
Oh man, for those that are analysts, just think about how long you would last without a computer. How bored out of your mind do you get when you didn't have a computer, right?
Oh my goodness, yeah. So after Raleigh, I was there for about a year, and opportunity kind of came up. Actually, 2 opportunities about the same time. I was kind of looking at Charlotte, North Carolina, which is about 2.5 hours from Raleigh. They had posted an analyst opening, and at the time, and still to this day, Charlotte-Mecklenburg really respected in our field, and they were one of the first ones. They had already done some stuff. I'd read some articles about some crime analysis. They had already done crime mapping with Epstein and some problem-oriented policing stuff. So they were kind of on the front end of a lot of those kind of initiatives that people were starting to do around the country at the time. And so, well-respected name, and interview with them, and eventually got the job there. But I'd also looked at VICAP analysts. You probably heard of those, Jason, with the FBI. I had applied for there, but at the time, the FBI, and probably to this day, a little bit slower with their following back up. And that's really where my career path went right then and there, because for the VICAP position eventually got back to me, but I'd already started in Charlotte, and I kind of was like, hey, appreciate the call back, but I'm comfortable. We just started with Charlotte-Mecklenburg as analyst, and so kind of went that direction at the time, and this was 2004.
Yeah. Well, it's a good problem to have, but it is still a problem. If you just started a position, maybe you're 3 or 4 weeks into a position, and then you get a call from another spot. Yeah. You really haven't evaluated 3 or 4 weeks. You really haven't evaluated your current position. Yeah. So you have to make a decision. It is a fork in the road. Type of thing for you, because you have to make that decision.
And I think I was kind of raised in a way of the respect thing too. And it was like, I've accepted this job. I was fortunate to get this job with Charlotte Mecklenburg. And I kind of felt like, not that I owed them anything, but out of respect and say, yeah, I want to stick with it, And so it worked out fine, and started with Charlotte Mecklenburg. And I think I ended up being, they had a little more analysts, about maybe 9-10 analysts doing various roles. And we were all together kind of in a big room with some planning people, police planning people, and accreditation was also in the room as well. And good group. I think I ended up supporting a couple of patrol divisions, as well as the analysts for like auto theft and burglary at the time at various points during that time that I was there. So Monica, when she was a supervisor when I was there, I believe she's about to retire, but great. She had been an analyst before. And that helps a lot too, kind of that ability to have a supervisor who kind of knows the job and knows what needs to be done, versus not necessarily a bad thing, but having a sergeant or a lieutenant who kind of gets stuck with the unit. We've probably heard those over the years as well, where the sergeant who kind of doesn't want to be on patrol anymore kind of gets stuck with the analyst unit, or they may have some computer techie skills or something like that. And sometimes those situations work out, sometimes they don't. So CMPD's kind of always kept that kind of structure in their particular analyst team of supervisors that are kind of non-sworn and have been analysts before. So that definitely helped out there. And just in that particular situation, the chief there was Daryl Stevens at the time. And again, he was very problem-oriented policing, the POP model. So he would have his officers, street officers, sergeants doing POP projects all over the place. So where it was a neighborhood problem as far as drug sales, street corner drug sales, or some sort of car break-ins at hotels, or a robbery of gas station issue, they would have to come to the analyst unit and get information from us to present to the chief or his command staff quite often. So it really kind of pushed the top-down approach for the problem-oriented policing strategy at Charlotte Mecklenburg.
So is he the one you have a special nickname for, that chief?
Oh yes, I call him the sweater vest chief, because he always had a sweater vest on, and he was like your grandpa. He knew everybody's name. It was amazing. Talking about a department that was 1,700 employees. Every time he saw me, he knew my name, and I felt like he knew everybody's. He knew from the patrol officer, the newest patrol officer, to the majors and the deputy chiefs. He just was that type of guy. You have your different chiefs. You have some chiefs that want to come out to the homicides and they might be in full uniform, and he was just that type of chief. Just had the calming influence, I think. And some people like that. Some people look more to a uniform type of chief. But it was definitely a different environment coming from the chief in Raleigh, who was NYPD, always wearing the uniform chief, versus the sweater vest chief, for sure.
Yeah, it sounds like Mr. Rogers as the police chief.
Really? Very similar, for sure.
So the problem-oriented policing aspect, it always just amazes me that we in law enforcement have all these special names for stuff. And when it turns into something that's so basic, it's like, well, who's not doing problem solving? I mean, like, but I guess I understand the concept, but it is funny to me when I hear that there's a special police. It's like community-oriented policing. I'm like, well, who's not talking to the public? I mean, who's right? Again, I'm being a little bit coy with this, but in terms of the problem solving and having that be the focus, and then you obviously came from the Raleigh, which has more of a CompStat model. I guess, what is your take on both concepts? Do you feel that one was more effective than the other, or what?
It's a tricky question. I think they're both effective. I think from my experience and currently in Rock Hill, we have a CompStat meeting once a month. It's a lot different than how we were doing in Raleigh, and talk about that in a little bit. But I think they're both have good values to them. It felt like the problem-oriented policing strategy. It just felt like it all comes down to accountability, I feel like. And the CompStat model a lot of times feels like it's really a kind of a top command accountability focus. And the problem-oriented policing, especially at CMPD, it just felt like even the road officer, the street officers were involved in it, whether they wanted to or not. We know how that goes, but they had a purpose and kind of a mission to kind of be involved. And one quick example of that was they would come in and ask us and say, all right, well, is there data on this? And it could have been, race sex data, or, make models of cars, or what was being stolen. And sometimes we would tell them, we're like, well, we have that data filled on the report, but unfortunately, you guys don't fill it out half the time. And they would be like, oh, that's why we do what we do. And it almost felt like bringing them in and kind of having those conversations, they kind of started understanding the value of collecting good data and what they were taking the incident reports on. So I don't know if that helps you, Jason, on that, but I definitely felt like that was kind of the accountability piece fell a little bit further down the line when it came to that.
Yeah, well, I'm going to do a shameless plug for a new show. I am teaming with Charlie Giberti and Chris Delaney on a new show called Cocktails and Crime Analysis.
Oh, nice.
And our first episode is published. And our first episode, we sat down with Deb Piehl, longtime NYPD and knows a lot about CompStat. And that was one of the questions I asked her was, with the CompStat model, you're doing it for the executives. You're doing it for the police chief. It's not collaborative per se.
Yeah.
Right. It would be nice if there was something where it was more of a team aspect where we're all coming together to have synergy. And I think what you mentioned there with the problem-oriented policing is that can be very collaborative.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
It almost needs to be collaborative because it's got to go outside the police department most often. Any patrolman will tell you that it gets frustrating going to the same addresses, going to the same areas, dealing with the same people over and over and over again without any change. And so they can be motivated as well on their side. You said whether they like to or not, but some folks are like, hey, I really want to help. And going through the problem-oriented policing approach, it can be way more effective than just doing the same, writing the same reports, making the same arrests over and over and over again.
That's right. And I mean, the CompStat model, and completely respect Deb Piehl a ton. And the NYPD model, a lot of data, a lot of numbers on the screen and that kind of stuff. And sometimes you end up just getting lost in the numbers and you might not actually delve into the actual problem itself and having to, like you said, work with outside agencies or other city departments or whatever the issue is. And I feel like you kind of get quicker through the numbers a little bit with the problem-oriented policing model in some aspects, but sometimes it just depends on the department and the nature of the jurisdiction you may be working in as well. So, and
there's nothing to say you can't do both, right?
Absolutely.
It's not one or the other, but it is interesting that they are very usually different approaches though.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's funny because Deb she'll roll her eyes because there's a lot of CompStat right out there because it's a lot of people just took certain pieces of it and then went with it instead of following the whole recipe. They only take bits and pieces of the recipe that they like, type of thing.
Yeah.
So
you're right. Absolutely.
That frustrates Deb because it's like, well, you're not necessarily doing the whole thing, right? You're not focusing on patterns and data, and your accountability is only part of the equation.
Well, and that comes up too with the DDAX model. We've done it here in bits and pieces at Rock Hill PD. But if you talk to anybody about DDAX and how you really should do it, you have to do all the steps. You have to be all in. You can't just say, well, we kind of do DDAX. Yeah, we drive around in our, what are we really doing? And that's like with any model of policing, whether you have an intelligence unit or whatever it is, where you're saying, oh, we're intelligence-led policing agency. Well, what does that truly mean, or what does all those words actually mean, and throughout your agency and how that's being implemented? That's always the key. And sometimes the analysts are just the cog in the wheel. We're just the piece to say, hey, we'll do whatever command staff wants us to do, but we also still need some guidance on which direction and what outcomes and outputs we want to produce.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, then let's get into Rock Hill. So this is, you're at Charlotte from 24 to 25. I mean, 24 to 25. 04 to 05. Sorry, a couple decades off. 04 to 05. And then what makes you leave Charlotte for Rock Hill?
Yeah, so good question. Sometimes I still ask myself that once in a while, but a lot of it is about timing. So I wasn't looking to leave Charlotte Mecklenburg at the time. A great agency, like I mentioned before. But going back to the internship, Professor Hunt had reached out to me and said, "Hey, there's a new chief in Rock Hill, Chief John Gregory at the time, and he's coming from High Point, and he had done, I don't know, Jason, if you've heard of the High Point Initiative. Right about that time, he was kind of involved in some of that, as High Point drug markets and stuff that they were doing up there in High Point, North Carolina. And he had just taken the job in Rock Hill, and he said, hey, he's looking for, they don't have a crime analyst. He needs a crime analyst. He wants a crime analyst. I think you'd be a good fit. I said, never heard of Rock Hill, South Carolina. Don't know anything about it, but okay, I'll put in and see if I get an interview and see what happens. Came down and interviewed, and great people, great interview. Kind of met some of this is what sold it for me, Jason. And it's amazing how the little things will do it for you sometimes. Met some of the secretaries, and they were going back to, we were talking about the Charlotte Mecklenburg chief and the grandpa feeling and stuff. Talked to these ladies at the department. They walked me around the building, kind of asked me some questions, asked me about my family, my parents, offered me a brownie.
Special brownie?
Yeah. But it was like one of those moments where I said it felt like home. It was just one of those, hey, I kind of could see myself here, and being a first analyst, the opportunity to kind of create the job using my previous experiences so far with bigger agencies like a Raleigh and a Charlotte at the time. I kind of asked some good questions, are you guys doing crime maps? No, but we want to. How's your RMS CAD? It's pretty good. It's pretty good. We've got a IT guy specifically for the police department. We've got a good system, good 911. We manage our own data. I'm like, okay, good. That's good. So the questions that I had about the job, they had the right answers, and it felt like a good fit. And so I ended up taking the position, and I'm still here this day. And I was the only analyst for, a good 15, 16 years here. And we finally, a couple of years ago, were able to get a second analyst position through a grant. And the good thing about our city is when you do put in for a grant, it's a grant position. But when the grant runs out, they don't approve of any new position without already going to fund it. So it doesn't go away. So if they put in for a grant, they're all in, and they're all in for an additional position. So we were able to clearly keep that position. So now we have 2 analysts, which is, for a growing city, we're about 75,000 population and growing. It's been a good help for me and the department as well to have 2 analysts.
You mentioned High Point, and I knew that sounded familiar. So I did a quick search on my guest list here. Patrick Servey. I interviewed him. He was from High Point. But the audience may not necessarily be familiar with, when you say the High Point process, they might not know that.
Yeah, that was the deterrence model. So they focused on a neighborhood, and it was high drug markets. And I can't remember the professor, the doctor that they partnered with, but it ended up being like pretty well-known strategy as far as when you go to a lot of these websites for problem-oriented policing and proven strategies like hotspot policing and those types of things. What they did in that area in those neighborhoods to reduce drug trafficking, they were able to take that similar initiative and incorporate that into other jurisdictions and showed some similar results. So he, at the time, the chief that was at Rock Hill when I got hired, he was a captain and a major during that time. So he kind of saw the value of the crime analysis and the mapping of the problems and using the resources in a focused area to kind of make a difference. So that kind of helped me here, because walking into the situation, he was all about the crime analysis and crime patterns and trends, and knowing that, hey, he wanted to start a kind of a CompStat model in some aspects, but he knew the value of the data and the analysis, and that really kind of helped me stay here, even though I had no ties to the Rock Hill area. So kind of helps you as an analyst when you have a supportive chief, for sure, because it's that kind of top-down approach that really helps out.
Caleb Meyers with Garner Police Department, and my PSA is put the phones away. Man, we live in a society now, and I'm a culprit of this as well, is I've never had a clear mind when I put that phone down and when I think about some other stuff. So, and there's so much to learn out there. I mean, this can go for anything, right? At the job, at home, on the road. You see it everywhere. We're so attached to our phones. And like I said, it's just better to put it down and to just learn something else, do something else, because you're going to have a clearer mind and be fresh for whatever you're about to tackle.
Hi, I'm Jason Wilkins. I'm here with this public service announcement to talk to your kids about art school and be honest with them about their real ability. And maybe being an analyst is a better idea for them.
You didn't do the dishes?
Well, no, I was busy doing other chores. But my completed chores is up 5 in the last 7 days.
Yeah, but you're still down 13 over the last 28 days.
Well, I see your shopping purchases is up 20% this month.
My spending is still down year to date. In fact, my black shoe purchases are half of what they were this time last year.
Well, thank goodness last year wasn't a normal year.
Plus, I bought you new underwear, so your clothes purchases is up 40% this month compared to last month.
Oh, wait, there were no clothes purchases the previous month, Miss Perfect. I didn't know you had the ability to divide by 0.
You should be happy. Your temperature-led policing program has worked great in this house. I have not touched your precious thermostat in the last 6 months.
Millions of homes in the U.S. are impacted by people wanting to be comfortable in their homes. Temperature-led policing. Control the temperature, control the cost.
As you're talking here, I'm laughing because I'm thinking about how interesting it can be for police departments and their hiring of police chiefs. And I think in a way almost like professional sports. Right? If you're a football fan, I mean, the New England Patriots were so good for so long that it seemed like every year one of their assistant coaches was being hired by another team to be their head coach. When I was at Baltimore, we had a couple of chiefs from New York, and I think we had one from Detroit. These folks from either a totally different city, and in your latest case there, you're hiring somebody from not too far away from Rock Hill. But it is funny how people become chiefs and move, and the city council or the mayor that's hiring these folks, their rationale for going outside of the department as opposed to within the department.
Yeah, great point. And not to be long-winded on this part, but our current chief has been with the department. He was an internal guy, and he's been with our department for about 10 years now. But he's been here over 30 years. And like you said, the going external versus internal, the current city manager and our government setup is kind of his boss, and not the mayor and not the council, but it's the city manager. And the city manager felt really comfortable with our current chief and kind of him knowing the area, knowing the people. And this is where we still, again, mentioned the CompStat. We still do the CompStat, but our current chief is very community policing driven, which, like you said, Jason, you can kind of do a multitude of things, but the community policing aspect that we do a lot, and people really love it, and I think the officers actually love it too, is we attend and this is no lie, Jason, every single neighborhood meeting. We're sending crime stats, we're sending an officer. Sometimes we as analysts go, but there's always, whether there's 2 people in the room or 200 people in the room. If it's an HOA meeting, if it's a monthly neighborhood meeting, we have a representative there, whether they're talking about the shooting that happened last night or dogs barking or speeding. You run the gamut of issues, but that's what our chief is kind of his driving force, is that community relationships, so that when you have an officer involved shooting or an incident that hits the media, positive or negative, we kind of have that trust from the community. And so that kind of helps. And, that starts with providing accurate information as far as the crime statistics, but also providing the officers enough background that they're confident enough to explain a situation or explain a current crime trend that's going on in that particular neighborhood.
We were talking before the recording here how we were both about the same age, and we went to college in the 90s. And when I think of community-oriented policing, I think of the 90s, right?
Yeah,
so my concern, my concern with is, like, are we going to get to the point where we're just going to recycle these concepts, right? Is it we're just going to rotate through community-oriented policing, problem-oriented policing, intelligence-led policing, with maybe one or two new concepts mixed in.
Yeah, sometimes I'm sitting in a CompStat meeting in our current agency, and I've been here so long that a sergeant will bring up an idea about something. I'm like, yep, we tried that in 2013, didn't work. And so sometimes you kind of rehash good and bad ideas, and sometimes they're great ideas, and it's like, oh, let's restart that program again. That actually was successful. Versus sometimes we go back to the same old habits of doing things kind of the wrong way. And not that we do these, but sometimes I see agencies doing gun buybacks or scared straight programs or DARE or whatever. And it's just, we don't want to rehash bad ideas. We want to push forward with good ideas, so that's a great point there.
I always give him credit for this, even though I'm not sure at this point. Old man Elder can't remember who says what anymore on his podcast. But Eric Piehl, I give him credit for this, of saying with CompStat, when it was created, like data wasn't readily available to a lot of folks. So you came to these meetings to get an idea of what your data is.
Yeah.
Today, no one's waiting for a CompStat meeting to find out what their data looks like. People probably are expecting it before their coffee in the morning. From your vantage point, now that you've gone through a couple of different departments with CompStat, in today's CompStat, as an analyst, what are you hoping the audience in the room gets from CompStat?
I'm glad you asked that question, because I want to touch on how we run CompStat, and that may kind of come, like you said, what are we getting out of these meetings? And so our CompStat, we just had one yesterday, and just thinking about our meeting yesterday, we talked about a variety of issues, from a specific homicide that we had to our relationship currently with our local hospital. We also talked about an issue with a housing facility that houses, I hate to call them problematic juveniles, but juveniles that have some behavioral issues. We have one of those in our city. We're hosting the World BMX Championships in May in Rock Hill, believe it or not. We have a velodrome and a BMX facility and all. We have a lot of interesting things. And so we're hosting this. We hosted it about 6-7 years ago. And so when we talk about things in CompStat, there's some statistics and some number driven in some of the aspects of how we got to that topic. But our setup is kind of a roundtable discussion, and we've got a good 20-25 people in the room from all our different departments. And we kind of roundtable the problem, and we try to walk out of the room with either some follow-up questions for specific people, meeting with a director of, say, the hospital or whatever, and some task oriented to say, hey, we need to figure out this issue and come back with some strategies. And maybe they work, maybe they don't work, but it's that kind of follow-up and assessment that I think is the main thing that agencies should get out of CompStat, is just assessing what the issues are and following up with those and making sure that you have some direction to what you're doing, and not just walking out of the room and saying, okay, well, we had a problem and Joe over there is going to solve it. Having a little bit more ownership as far as a teamwork, if that makes sense.
I think it's gotten to the point where it's just another meeting. And I don't mean that negatively.
Sometimes
it's
it
just
is.
That, like, if you think of any company, any business in the world, any office, you have meetings, and there's certain key points and objectives that need to be met, and you're making sure that everybody's on the same page. What are the roadblocks? What's keeping stuff from being done? And making sure that everybody is on board and doing what they're supposed to be doing. I mean, that's right. I think that's what CompStat has turned into. I mean, it is a review of computer statistics, right? But I mean, in the end of the day, are we using resources properly? Is there another way to do business? Does anybody have any new ideas? If right, you're collaborating. And it's funny. I think for as every meeting that I've ever been a part of, it's so exciting in the beginning, and it eventually gets stale. It eventually gets stale, and then you need to rebrand it eventually.
It's so funny you mentioned the rebranding, because I think I've been said in about 10 to 12 rebranding meetings in my career here at Rocky. And our newer analyst, she's been here about 2 years, and I tell her that all the time. Like, yep, here's another like rebranding of what we're doing. And like I said, we offer our opinions, but in the end, it's your leadership. Your leadership has to decide what's important, and you can go around with all these acronyms and those types of things, but in the end of the day, you've got to decide what's best for your community to make your citizens safe. And analysts, we're part of that, and we have to figure out the best way on our end to do that as well.
I noticed with your title there at Rock Hill, you are a research data analyst, which I always find
interesting about titles, isn't it? Yeah.
You're right. Like, I don't know why we need 1,700 different ways to describe a law enforcement analyst, but here we are. So I'm curious your perspective on your title.
Oh yeah, it's interesting. So I think at CMPD, I believe at the time we were management analyst, and the story behind that real quickly was Monica, who was the supervisor at the time, she had kind of a forward-thinking aspect about pay and to get crime analysts more pay. And so I think she had done some research on some other Charlotte, departments within the city, and kind of found out, okay, there's analysts in other departments that are doing similar things that police analysts do, and let's give them the title that kind of matches that to get more pay. And I was at a conference, IACA conference, I think one year, maybe it was the New Orleans or something one year, and New Orleans and some other police departments had kind of gone the route of data analyst. They were using the word data more, and it was kind of that hot data analytics was kind of, you started seeing Power BI and Tableau, and all these things were starting to being presented with crime analytics. And Jeff, can't think of his last name, he was working in New Orleans at the time. So I kind of got this idea. It was a discussion at IACA where people were talking about their title and using words like research and data, or data analytics, or data specialist, or taking away, kind of differentiating yourself away from like the forensic police officers, crime scene people. And so it's funny, that's my title, but internally we call ourselves crime analysts all the time, crime intelligence analysts, intel analysts. It's kind of semantics, but when you think about it, sometimes it could help when you're trying to get pay increases or a pay range increase. And I think really, Jason, that's kind of what it was all about when we kind of changed the title there a little bit for me in that role.
Yeah, and that happened at my work too. We're all now developers. Now we can be tied to IT positions, which can be paid higher than an analyst position in some cases. So,
yeah.
All right, this brings us to your analyst badge story. And for those that may be new to the show, the analyst badge story is the career-defining case or project that an analyst works. And so for you, we're here at Rock Hill. It's 2019, and you're dealing with a hit-and-run case.
Yeah, that's right. So we had a pretty serious hit and run, unfortunately. And the aspect of the story was that a guy, our victim, was riding his moped, unfortunately, pretty busy highway, and not that it was illegal, but kind of dark at night, about 10:30. And he was riding his moped, and an individual came up on him and basically pretty much ran him over. Still this day, I don't know if he ever saw him or what he saw or didn't see, but he hit our victim, and our victim had some very serious injuries, not fatal, but some very serious injuries. And the key for me on this one was it happened right behind where I live. My house kind of backs up to this road. And so when it happened, I didn't know the specifics. So I think I called the sergeant on duty at the time. I said, hey, what's going on? I see a lot of blue lights, fire trucks and stuff behind my house. He goes, yeah, we had a guy on a moped gets hit. When it's a hit and run, we don't know the suspect vehicle. There's some debris and damage. And they're like, he may or may not live. And I was like, oh, that's terrible. So get to work the next day, kind of look into the incident. Come to find out, there's a detective assigned to the case, and he tells me that they found some vehicle parts at the scene, and very specific bumper and some serial number parts that came back to a 1987 Toyota truck. And so we were like, okay, well, that's kind of good because it's not too common. It's not like a 2010 Honda Accord or something, or Dodge Charger or something like that. Yeah. And so I said, hey, I got an idea. Good analyst down at our fusion center for the state. I said they can go into DMV and pull make and model of vehicles in our county, York County, and kind of give us a printout of some addresses based on what's in DMV. And so I followed up with them, and I said, hey, my relationship with them, I could probably get this back within 24, 48 hours, so I can get something pretty quick. And so got the information back it was probably 10 o'clock at night one night, maybe the next day. And of course, analysts, what we do, we're checking our work email when we should be relaxing, and check my work email, and I see it comes in. I start glancing through the list, and I see an address that's close by to the scene of the crime. And it really stands out to me, and I kind of have this gut feeling based on what we know about crime and crime series and stuff like that, location, geographical importance. I really kind of focus in on this address of a potential vehicle and a suspect. And so I get out of bed, and I'm like, curiosity was killing me. I got to drive by this house. I got to see if I can see this truck. And so I drive by, and it's about 11. I'm not lying, Jason. It's 11:30, almost midnight. I'm driving by this house, and drive by, and it's dark, and I see some vehicles, but nothing really matches up. And I'm like, maybe it's not going to be our guy. And so the next day, the detective's like, hey, let's go and give me your top 5 addresses, and let's go. You can ride with me. Let's go out and look and see if we can see the vehicle with the damage. And I said, cool. And so he says, all right, what's your first choice? And I said, well, let's go to this one. I said, kind of rode by it last night, didn't see it. I don't think it's it, but I got this gut feeling. So we ride by the house, and this is about 9:30, 10 in the morning. And me and 2 other detectives are in the car, and we're driving by real slow, and we don't see anything. We're almost past the house, and we look, and we catch a glimpse of the truck parked hidden behind a big storage building, and we can see a tarp over it. And we can't say what we said, but we were like, holy crap. And so we put it in reverse, and we get out, and we walk the yard, and we pull the cover back, and the damage is there. There's evidence of blood on the bumper. I mean, it's our vehicle. And so we call forensics out. We get a search warrant. We talk to there's a female at the house at the time, and she's like, what's going on? And we're like, ma'am, did you know your vehicle's parked here? And she goes, yeah, my boyfriend drives it. He never parks it there, though. I don't know why he parked it there. And we're like, yeah, unfortunately, we're investigating a hit and run with some serious, injuries. And come to find out, we get enough to put an arrest warrant on the guy, and he has some drug history, and he admits that he knew he hit somebody or something, and he fled right back to his house and laid on the couch. And he lives so close to the scene that he could hear the ambulances and the fire trucks, and so he knew something bad had happened. He didn't know what, and he figured we would eventually find him and figure it out. So it was kind of a good and bad situation. Bad was somebody got majorly hurt, but the good side was we kind of were able to use our data and look at it from a geographical perspective and kind of solve that case pretty quickly. So that was definitely, and the guy, the suspect ended up getting, I think, got 10 years. He got some serious jail time. So that really kind of helped out that he got held accountable for that.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to butcher the saying, but there's a saying I've heard over the years that you're most likely to get in an accident within a mile of your house.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah. You're absolutely right. I think our victim lived close by too. It was all, well, at first we didn't know how close the suspect may live because the highway is pretty well traveled between a couple of jurisdictions. But it worked out. That kind of worked to our favor a little bit there.
Yeah. And what happened to the victim?
The victim, he ended up losing, I think he lost his leg, but he's doing fine outside of that. I mean, he survived, but unfortunately, he had some life altering injuries, and but he's alive and well to this day. So that's somewhat good thing on that aspect.
All right. So before we move on, I noticed on your resume here that one of the duties you have is research national crime trends and analytical techniques. And I was just kind of curious. I'm not sure I've seen that on other folks' duties, so I'm kind of curious what you've discovered with your research and what you've implemented.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it's just looking at ways that people are reducing and preventing crime. So it's looking at those things like George Mason University and how they have the crime websites where you can go on there and look at their matrix and say, okay, if you have this type of problem, this is a good strategy to handle that problem. So whether it's car break-ins, they're the pop guides, going back to the problem-oriented policing, some of the stuff that people have put out, Arizona State University and some of their stuff on their website as far as strategies to implement. So it's basically looking at research, looking at, hey, even people, what they're doing with, we don't have a real-time crime center, but kind of some of the, what are people doing with surveillance cameras, the good and the bad, the legal aspect of some of these things, kind of passing that information on to our decision makers, our captains, our major, our chief, to say, hey, these are some good ideas that other agencies are using, or this is some research-based evidence to pass on to city council about this complaint they had, or this is why we do hotspot policing, or this is why we're doing this type of strategy, this partnership with our neighborhoods or our hotels. This is why we kind of maybe use LPRs. So it's kind of more of a, I've kind of taken that task on over the years of kind of being the research guy to say, all right, what are other agencies doing, or what does the research say as far as the criminology field or sociology field? What can we be doing better to reduce and prevent crime? So that's really what that's all about, is kind of being that guy in the department that come to you guys and say, hey, what's your take on this strategy? Do you think this is a good strategy? I heard the sheriff's office is looking and doing this. And I might say, there's not, the research is kind of mixed on that. Chase policies, that's kind of came up too. So it's kind of being that research guy for the department a lot of times.
Yeah. Is there anything specific to law enforcement analysis that you maybe either currently working on that or has turned out to be super interesting?
We're really working lately on like top offenders and kind of coming up with a formula to not be subjective but be objective on who were identified as our top offenders, basically using our data, arrest data, offender data, gang data, those types of objective data points to kind of rank our offenders and say, all right, these are our top 5 offenders, and this is why they're involved in the shootings or robberies or they're carrying guns. Because one of the things that happened recently, I kind of talked about this when we had our regional conference, was a lot of times we would come into the room and people would say, all right, who's our top offenders? And people would just throw out names. I arrested Johnny last night and he had a gun on him and he's a top offender. Or I saw such and such posting on Instagram with a gun. And it kind of got to the point where it's like, okay, well, this is kind of very subjective, just kind of throwing names against the wall. And we need to kind of come up with a very standard strategy so that if something comes in court, we can readily explain, this is our scoring system. This is how these individuals were our top offenders. This is why we had focused deterrence and focused enforcement on this address or this person, and going away from some of those things where the research was saying, hey, checkpoints and broad brushed kind of traffic checkpoints in a high crime neighborhood was not the best strategy, because you ended up pulling over grandmas and people that were kind of pro police, and now you're kind of just pulling everybody over and justifying it because the whole neighborhood was a hot spot, when in reality you have 4 or 5, at most 10 people causing all the drama and the crime problems in that neighborhood. So that's something I've really tried to harp on with our department, is to kind of go away from these just random traffic checkpoints.
You mentioned regional association. Is that the Carolina Crime?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So I'm on the board for the Carolina Crime Analysis Association. So that got started up. Michelle Covington, who is at USC Upstate, she kind of was the lead on that as far as starting that up, and at her university. And our current president, Amanda Bruner, who I think you've interviewed on this show as well. She's the current president. Caleb Meyers from Garner PD.
Yeah, he's a character.
Oh, he's great. Yeah. And you know what's funny about Caleb? Him and I, the relationship is so wild, in the sense of, I grew up in Garner, North Carolina. I was born and raised. And so him being the analyst for that police department is kind of a cool connection him and I have. But yeah, on the board, I'm Vice President Communications, and I currently just started my 2nd term on the board. So growing association. We just had our conference a couple months ago in Charleston, and well attended. We had Eric Piehl, you mentioned earlier. He was there presenting on GIS, and a great group of attendees. I think everybody had a really good time at that conference.
Yeah. And you felt that, what are you looking to improve on next year?
I think what we tried to do this year was we ran 2 kind of sessions simultaneously, and a lot of people really liked that. We kind of were able to get more topics. So kind of a broad, just continue to focus on like broad topics that are going on. We had Andrew Willer there. So he's looking more from kind of the data heavy data analytics side, but we also had someone talking about real-time crime centers. And then we had a guy from Walmart from the private sector intelligence analytics side of what they're doing from their company side. And so just trying to provide a conference that kind of broad range of topics and focusing on the new analysts, but also the veteran analysts as well, and keeping it fresh for them and not just going over some of the basic topics all the time, just kind of those advanced topics, more maybe a Power BI class, advanced Power BI. So I think that's where we're going for the next conference as well. So we're working on location pretty soon. Hopefully we'll be able to announce that.
Let's get into some advice for our listeners. And you can pick. You can either pick advice for new analysts or pick advice for advanced analysts.
Yeah, so I think advice would be one kind of simple one is internship. I'm a big fan of internships. I had an internship, as I mentioned before. We do internships at our department. Sometimes they're hard to find. You're not going to find a lot of paid internships. So sometimes that can be tough for an older or a more middle-aged person who's trying to work their way into the field versus somebody who's currently at a university getting some internship hours, credit hours. So big fan of internship. And the reason why is just kind of meeting people in the field, but also getting that real world experience and seeing how it is. And you may find out it's not the career for you, or you may find even more interest in it. So it's good to get your foot in the door. So big fan of internships. Another, especially for the younger analysts, is being flexible. Sometimes it's tough to get out of your comfort zone and be able to have to move to another state or another town, but you're really going to have to be flexible to get that first job. And so one of our current analysts, she lives in the area, our intern analyst, she's interning with us, but she just got a job in New York, and she's excited about it, but that's the job that kind of found her and she found it. And so it's going to be a good experience, learning experience for her, but that's the job that she kind of had to go for. So that kind of flexibility, Jason, I think is a good recommendation. And then advice for experienced analysts, somebody that's been at an agency for 5, 6, 10 years, it's kind of those riding the up and downs, keeping your head up, being able to adjust for a new chief or a new unit, getting moved to a different division. You're constantly having to adjust. Even like we've been talking about, a new policing strategy, you're going from CompStat to a stratified model or whatever it is. That flexibility is so key in our profession. So just having that mindset to be flexible and not get too caught in a rut and riding the waves of the job for sure.
And then how about return on investment? What is something that an analyst can study today that might be important 5 years from now?
Jason, I'm a big fan of the GIS. I think that you can incorporate so many things, focusing on the geographical aspects of crime. RTM, the risk terrain modeling that Joel Kaplan's doing, being able to use that in a variety of crime topics, social topics, whether it's drug trafficking on a street corner or car break-ins, that geographical aspect, and just learning and valuing the ArcGIS and the crime mapping. Even if you can't afford the Esri products, there's so many applications now out there that allow you to incorporate mapping into your data, whether it's calls for service, crime, citations, gang information. I just feel like the GIS is kind of still a big value point for a crime analyst.
Yeah. When you mentioned in the beginning, you were talking about maps when you were growing up, and then we were talking about 2002, 2003. I was laughing in a way, but didn't get a way to interject it into the conversation. Is right. But during 2002, that was like the MapQuest year.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
So that was when you didn't have GPS. You had to print out the map ahead of time.
Oh, yeah.
And that's how you got from point A to point B. Is like you printed out the directions ahead of time.
Yeah, and what I mean, when I started internship at Greensboro PD, I mean, you're talking about less than 5 years away from computers being with Google and Netscape and stuff. That was still in the infancy. And so you're talking about mapping, and people were still transitioning just points on a map, and people still talk about that today at IECA conferences, but it was very true. I mean, it was very new technology, and the concept is still cool and still, still provides that key, that visual key for anybody in a police department to kind of see where things are happening.
For those that don't know what MapQuest is, GPS is way better. Okay. Because when you got the MapQuest, you got one way to go, and if there's an accident, you have no way really to know the workaround or anything like that. So if there's a better way to go after you started, you don't know it using just MapQuest, but you do with the GPS.
Yeah, sounds like you had some experience with that problem.
Oh man, yes. All right, very good, Damien. All right, let's finish up with personal interest then. And for you enjoy studying local planning trends.
Yeah, it's kind of, we talking about it. It goes back a little bit of the geography curiosity for me. It's looking at, I'm constantly, I tell you, Jason, like I have access to our planning department and everything that's kind of coming in on their side. And I'm kind of looking at it sometimes from crime trend perspective of, oh man, that we're about to get a new whatever store, or we're going to have a new gas station in this particular area. That's going to be a hot spot of crime for us. And so kind of it fits the job role, but I've always had an interest in just building and what's coming down the line as far as commercial development, residential, just that kind of aspect of newness. And I think it incorporates some of the geographical and geography fascination I've always had as a kid, where things are going, what's being built, and that whole world is always just kind of fascinated me. So we do work a good bit with our planning department. We do some CPTED analysis, crime prevention through environmental design. And so we've kind of got a pretty decent partnership with planning, and they'll kind of let us know about, hey, this apartment complex is going to be built, and we'll send one of our captains over, and they'll talk with the developer about cameras and what they're going to do about cameras and lighting in the parking lot. You have your general code about lighting, but we talk to them about, hey, you might want to add a walkway light to this area or that type of stuff. So that's kind of been beneficial too, and it kind of falls into my natural interest as well, as you mentioned.
Yeah, the family and I like to, when we see a area being cleared, we like to try to guess what we think is going in there.
Yeah.
Right. And then as we watch the development, they're like, oh no, that looks too small. That's not what we until they put up a sign or somebody tells us. So that's a fun game that we play.
Yeah, the new hotspot now down here in the Carolinas is the whole Buc-ee's trend, and so every new development in town, you read the online comments, and everybody's like either dollar store or Buc-ee's. That's everybody's guess.
In the same regard, one of the things that I am fascinated in, and I don't know why I necessarily find this interesting, but I almost wish, how they have Wayback Machines for websites. Yeah. Meaning you could go through and pick a date, and this is what the website looked like at a particular date. I do find it interesting when someone says like, oh, well, such and such business used to be there, or what that business was beforehand, or what that land was beforehand. I do wish that there was more information about the history of certain locations. Right.
Yeah, you're right.
I do find that interesting, like over time, like especially if it's been like 10, 15 businesses gone through the rent cycle in that location. I find that interesting.
Yeah. Well, and for like a researcher too, talking about crime is, say you're looking at a crime trend for 20 years and you're like, well, you're doing some sort of density comparison map and you're like, well, why was this a hot spot in 2009 and then now there's nothing? You're like, well, that used to be our worst apartment complex and we tore it down. So there's always kind of that, good to know the historical aspect of our property. For sure, the transitioning sometimes can definitely impact good and bad your crime. All
right, very good. More or less section of the show is words to the world. This is where you can promote any idea that you wish. Damien, what are your words to the world?
Yeah, so I was talking to my son who's a fifth grader, and he's got fifth grade graduation coming up, and he had to do a quote for the yearbook, and his quote was "Keep your head up," and I thought that was good for our upcoming conversation that we're having now, Jason. And that just be my word of advice: is keep your head up. There's always going to be those roadblocks in your way and things that may not go your way one day, but by Friday everything's great. And so just keep your head up, and especially as crime analysts, a lot of times, especially those agencies where that you're the only analyst there, you're going to feel a lot of isolation just interact at a conference, go attend a regional crime sharing meeting, talk to people on the IACA web forums. That's kind of how I felt for many years, and it really helped me to feel a part of something by being around other analysts and hearing their goods and their bads, their success stories and their troubles as well. Helped me push through, and there were many times where I kept my head up because of I remembered something that somebody said, another analyst said, or somebody that I talked to. So that's my main words of advice in anything in life, but specifically for our profession, is just keep your head up and keep moving forward.
Very good. Well, I leave every guest with you. Give me just enough to talk bad about you later. But I do appreciate you being on the show, Damien. Thank you, sir. So much, and you be safe.
Yes, take care, Jason. Appreciate you.
Thank you for making it to the end of another episode of Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. You can show your support by sharing this and other episodes found on our website at www.leapodcasts.com. If you have a topic you would like us to cover or have a suggestion for our next guest, please send us an email at leapodcasts@gmail.com. Till next time, analysts, keep talking.